but I think we're
Hi.
almost yourself on Facebook.
Oh, I don't know. I'm saying hello because I know that we're streaming somewhere.
Where are you streaming? How do you know you're streaming?
Because it says meeting is now streaming
Oh,
live on custom live streaming service. It gives me a notification.
It's not actually streaming yet, but it's close.
So I know when I cease to have privacy.
YouTube now. Let's see what I want to do on YouTube. I want to click that.
So I know
guys,
when I cease to have
about a
privacy.
minute and a half or so, and
now.
we'll get going. And I know I can hear myself. We'll get rid of that in a second.
So I know
guys,
when I cease
about
to have
a
privacy.
minute and a half or so.
Okay. Hello.
1 minute until showtime.
Just woke up for the stream. Just woke up. Where do you live?
Exactly. That's what we want to know.
He's young. When I was young, I could sleep until 1 o'clock too. Not anymore. Not anymore. All right, let's go live on Facebook.
And then you should give us our little dual window as well.
Yes.
It's alternating between us.
There we go. That good?
I still, actually, I'll look up here on YouTube. It'll show up in a second, I'm sure.
Oh, it's on Facebook. It lags.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine on YouTube now. I see it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Got a few people. People haven't woken up yet.
So Unshelled Coast is in New York and just woke up.
It's great to be young. Great to be young. What can I say? The good old days when I could.
Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Blog Talk Radio.
Hey everybody, welcome to Yaron and Amy show. I see everybody starting to roll in. Yes, slowly. I can see the names popping out. Hey Amy, how's it going?
It's going fine. Back from my vacation, and I see that you took off a little bit of time too, right?
Took off time? What was that?
From doing a show, you took off time for about a week.
Time from doing a show. I mean, yeah. I flew to Vegas, spent a day in Vegas, did Fox business.
That was awesome.
8 a.m. in the morning, did a talk, got back in a plane, came back to Puerto Rico. So I feel I'm still exhausted. I don't know, that those trips to the West Coast and back seem to exhaust more than trips to Europe for some reason. So how was it in where were you? You want to tell
I went to Amsterdam, and it was wonderful. And so I saw a lot of art, got to go out and do the touristy trip in the tulips. But what I did learn, and this is what probably you suffered from, is that when you go east, that's when you suffer more jet lag. And that's what I did.
Well, I don't know.
So when you came back?
It depends when you fly, and it depends whether you sleep on the plane or not, and how you conduct yourself that first day determines a lot. So it depends. Every time I go, it's a little different, but I've got all kinds of tricks to try to.
I'm going to need to connect with you if I travel like that again, just so that I can learn whatever tricks you've accumulated. Because I obviously did things wrong. I had major jet lag.
I fly Monday to Europe again. So
oh wow,
yeah, a little bit of vacation. So that'll be fun. I'll be in Monte Carlo. I've never been to Monte Carlo. Wow. So I'll be in Monte Carlo. I can check that box off too. So I guess it's a state. I guess it counts as a country. But you did a lot of walking. You were very green. You rode your bicycle.
No, I didn't ride a bike at all.
You also ride their bike?
No, I didn't ride a bike. Just walked a lot, and then took public transportation if I needed.
Amsterdam's great. I love Amsterdam.
No, it's really wonderful. So I decided, one of the big attractions for some people, of course, is that drugs are legal there. But I decided, since it's been so long since I'd even tried any marijuana, that I wanted to stay away and not even touch that. So no, that's not the attraction of Amsterdam. I had somebody write on my.
Well, the other attraction is prostitution is legal. That's a second attraction.
Yeah.
No. That's fun. Weird.
I didn't even walk through the red light district. Actually, I didn't even go through it. No.
It's so strange.
Or maybe I saw a little bit of it at one time.
Just interesting anthropologically, I guess. It's just weird. The whole experience is weird. But yeah, Amsterdam's great. Lots of art. Great art. You got Rembrandts and Vermeers and Van Gogh, I guess. I'm not a huge fan of Van Gogh, but his stuff is interesting. And just a lot of, I mean, the museum is just stock full of great art.
Yeah, they had a beautiful exhibit that they put together at the Rijksmuseum, which was all this portraiture. Just a huge collection of portraiture. So luckily I was able to take it in 2 doses. So went through a lot of the regular exhibit at, the regular displays in one day. And then the next day came back and did the special exhibit and kind of cleaned up some things that we'd missed the first day. So
I don't think I told people that I went to the art museum here in Puerto Rico.
So well, you said you were going to see Flaming June, right?
Yeah. So it's this art museum on the other side of the island in, why has the name escaped me? I really am getting old.
Begins with a P. That's all I remember. Because we talked about it. For
some reason it's not helping me.
Okay.
Anyway, it's on the other side of the island, which is really fascinating because the other side of Puerto Rico is like a desert. It looks like California,
wow.
like the deserty part of Orange County. And so it's completely dry. And it's a bit of a dump of a city, but the museum is
Ponce or something.
Ponce. Okay. That's right. Okay. Ponce. Thank you. She's younger than me, much younger than me. Ponce. And it's the museum is fantastic. It has 2 Bouguereaus that I've never seen before. Wow. It had like 2 Jerome. And it had this Flaming June, and it had a bunch of pre-Raphaelites, beautiful, gorgeous pre-Raphaelites. And it was like, whoa, this is in Ponce, Puerto Rico. Who knew?
Were you allowed to take pictures?
Yes. So we've got pictures where we tell.
So you need to Instagram and yeah.
Oh, Instagram. I'm so bad.
Share with us.
Yeah, I'll share.
I've shared a little bit of mine. At the whole Van Gogh Museum, you could not take photographs. Okay. So unfortunately,
yeah, no, we have good photos. So the paintings were for a small museum in Ponce, Puerto Rico. The percentage of good art was phenomenal. Some of it great art. Flaming June is gorgeous, and to see it live was really spectacular. But also the Bouguereaus were fantastic, and to see Jerome's. Jerome is pretty rare to find original Jerome's, and there were a couple of other French 19th century artists that were just fantastic.
Wow. Excellent. No, I'm glad you got to do that. Yep. So, I think this is a good conversation, but are we putting off my huge list of alliterative titles or topics?
Before we start on the list, I'm getting a lot of complaints.
Okay.
That I am not treating you nicely, that I'm domineering and overly, I can't, what did they describe? Overly masculine or something? Too dominating, not letting you talk, not letting your feminine charm come through. So I'm going to try to behave. Yeah, I get these long emails. It's not short. They kind of articulate the whole thing. I'll forward you some. It's
okay. There's one that I had wanted you to forward me that you still have to forward me. So you have to go back and dig up that one.
Yeah. Yes.
If you could dig that. But sure, I'd find the other. But let me tell people for the record, I'm perfectly fine with the back and forth, the rate of back and forth. And I butt in when I have something particular to say. And I promise I will continue to do that. I read my Jordan Peterson, about that you have to assert yourself and do all this stuff. So I will do it. Let's have
right. But Jordan only talks to young men. So I don't know.
Well, the other thing is it's also an illusion, right? Because here I put all this together. Yeah. And so I'm basically, I could put it in a really crude way. It's like, I've got Yaron as like my trained seal, Right. I put together the list of topics and say, okay, Yaron, go.
And then I want some defenders out there.
I'll defend you.
Okay? And exploiting me.
Okay, so now I'm going to exploit you. Here we go. So I've got, I think we're going to add pineapple pizza to this at the end. I don't know. We got a lot of P. It's a alliterative title with the letter P. Putin presidential Poutweeting. Huh?
I didn't notice it.
Oh, I said and not only that, I said pour your own because I'm pummeling you.
I'm so dense. All right, I didn't see it.
Okay.
Here it is, the P show.
Yes, the P show. Putin presidential Poutweeting, prescription drugs, politics, privacy, solar panels, Peterson's pragmatism, and provinciality.
Tweeting. I don't know what that is. And of course, pineapple pizza, that's also PP. So, okay, I get it now. All right.
And paleo.
There's a theme in paleo, of course. All right.
So this is my cop-out when I don't have a theme. I go alliterative. Okay, so Putin is my angle in the Iran story. Now, you spoke quite a bit about Iran and us, canceling the deal with Iran and what would the implications be and stuff on the show with Maria on Fox Business the other day. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, So yeah, go ahead.
No. So, I mean, we could talk about, what you think of things so far, but as far as I can tell in the news, the interesting angle is that it seems to have freed up Iran to try to lob some missiles over at Israel via Syria, I guess, and then Israel to hit some targets on Iran and Syria.
I'm not sure you could draw a causal relationship there. I don't think it's the deal is freed them up. I think they're testing the waters. The Iranians are solidly entrenched in Syria. They've got now a substantial northern front against the Israelis, both on the Syria border and, of course, with Hezbollah in Lebanon, which they control completely. They have this weird alliance with the Russians, where both the Russians and the Iranians support Assad, but it's not clear what the relationship is between Syria and Russia and how far Russia will go. In a sense, they'll protect Assad because they have clear strategic interest in protecting Assad in the Mediterranean. But will they protect the Iranian presence in Syria? I also read an article that's interesting. It turns out the Iranians have been training Afghan Shiite refugees in Iran. So these are Afghans that escaped Afghanistan because of the fighting. They've trained them and they basically brought them to Syria to fight for Assad. So they are basically fighters fighting against the uprising, against Assad's uprising. So there's a lot going on in Syria. As I've said many, many times, there's a lot of complexity there and people oversimplify it. So I think the Iranians were testing, and who knows, it could have been a rogue faction in the National Guards, the military of Iran that was testing itself, ought to see what the political will was of the mullahs in Tehran, because I think there's some tension there. And what they discovered is that it sounds like the Russians warned them of that the Israelis were going to retaliate.
Yeah, that's the report I got in the program notes. Is
that the Russians wouldn't stop the Israelis from retaliate, or wouldn't try to stop the Israelis from retaliate, and we should talk about why that is. But what they discovered was that the Israelis can retaliate, and the Israelis, crushed them. Now, I don't think they probably killed as many people as they would have if the Russians hadn't warned them. And I'm a big believer that in war you have to kill people to win. But I think the Russian warning probably saved a lot of lives. But what the Iranians discovered is the overwhelming force that Israel has, and when the Syrians try to shoot down the airplanes with the anti-aircraft batteries that they have, the Israelis easily avoided those and basically destroyed 4 very advanced Russian ground-to-air missile batteries. So in all respects, Israel just showed the Iranians kind of the firepower they had and just don't mess with us kind of message. And I guess the question is, why does Putin allow it to happen? Putin could have put his own Air Force into the air. And I think, well, a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons, which I think is interesting, is that he'd be embarrassed, right? What would happen if Israel shot down all those Russian planes, which I think they would, because I think really Air Force is far superior to the Russian one. Israeli jets, which are basically US jets, are far superior to the best Russian jets. Israeli technology is far superior to the Russian technology. And therefore, I think part of the issue is that Putin would have just been embarrassed by the fact that Israel would have wiped them out. And now Russia has, nuclear weapons, and it has, it's a much larger country than Israel, and so Israel doesn't want to go to war with Russia, but Russia doesn't want to be embarrassed by American technology and Israeli technology in the hands of really, really good Israeli pilots and Israeli military forces. So I think that's part of the reason. The other reason is there's no Russian interest in getting to war with Israel. And there's no Russian interest to really protect the Iranians. The only Russian interest is to prop up the Syrian regime and to have a naval base on the Mediterranean. And at every point in time that they can to embarrass Donald Trump. And America, not just Trump, but America generally.
And that's one thing. So as you say, if they had been embarrassed by the inadequacy of their technology in a confrontation with Israel, that would have, kind of taken away the ability to still intimidate or say that they've, got something against us, right? If their technology is really pathetic compared to ours, and that's shown early on, then he's basically done.
Absolutely. I mean, it would be embarrassing for him both because Israel's a tiny little country taking on the mighty Russian army and defeating it. And it would show that Israeli technology and American technology is far superior to Russian technology, which is absolutely true. And weapon systems are far superior, always have been. And it would be embarrassing for him. But again, he also, they've got an alliance with the Iranians. I mean, they're providing the Iranians with nuclear technology and a bunch of other things, and they're trading with the Iranians. But it's not I don't think it's a particularly comfortable alliance for the Russians. It's not clear exactly what they get in return long term. They have to be wary of it. They don't Russia wants to dominate that part of the Middle East. They don't want the Iranians to dominate. They do. The only reason they would prop up the Iranians is as a counter to the United States. So if you think about geopolitics for a minute, the United States has Israel, it has Saudi Arabia, it has the Gulf states, it has Egypt, it has Turkey, kind of maybe, but it has all these countries. And Russia just has Syria. And to the extent that Russia can have Iran, it then has influence in Iraq. And it creates a counterbalance to the American presence in the Middle East. And again, Putin is very much for perceiving himself as a superpower. And this is again why he doesn't want to get embarrassed. And a perception of we can stand up to the Americans. We're as powerful as the Americans. We're as influential as the Americans. We've got an empire ourselves. And so if you think of it in those terms, he wants the Iranians to be held up, but he doesn't want to give them too much power because he's a little worried of the Islamist elements within them. And that's, because he's got a terrorist problem in Russia as well, an Islamist terrorist problem as well. It's more Sunni than Shiite, but it's still a problem.
Okay. So you think that is a real problem? We could get into the whole Russia thing another time, but I was going to ask you in terms of what you were talking about on Maria's show the other day about whether we were going to get in conflicts with Europe over this deal, and was it going to require us, for instance, applying sanctions to companies? I think which of Airbus, I think it was you were talking about.
Just one, but Deutsche Bank and lots of technology companies from France and Germany have massive investments, not to mention China and Russia having massive investments. The reason the sanctions worked when they worked, and they did, this is the whole tragedy of the Obama deal, was that when they worked really, they were actually very effective, and they created real economic distress in Iran. And the reason they worked is they were truly, truly is too strong a word. They were being practiced fairly consistently by all these actors. Europe, the United States, Russia, and China all together really boycotted trade with Iran. So Iran was really suffering economically. And I think if you'd let that continue, you would have really pushed Iran to really compromise or to have a revolution internally. Right. Loosening those sanctions now has hurt us partially because it's divided this coalition. So now the Chinese, the Russians, and the Europeans are not going to participate in the boycott. I don't think we'll see whether the Trump administration is willing to go down the path of boycotting any company that doesn't boycott. Mm-hmm. And if they do, what is China, Russia, and Europe's response to that, and how far that goes and how that happens? Basically, what I think the Trump administration has done, which is not a bad thing if they'll follow up, but they won't, well, that's my prediction anyway, is that they've left only one option open, which is the military option. They basically left themselves with the only option to stop Iran at this point from continuing its stealth development of nuclear weapons, of nuclear technology, accumulating wealth by trading with Europeans, Russia, and China. The only way to stop them now is you can't reimpose the sanctions because the other parties won't go with it. So you're basically stuck with a military option. Now, or with an internal revolution. Now, I'm all for a military option, and I'm all for an internal revolution. But are the American people ready for that? The American people really willing to go to war in Iran? I'm very doubtful. Now, again, I think what's his name?
So you would be for a military option now versus simply encouraging any internal revolution?
I have been for military option for what, 17 years. So,
well, no, but I mean, yeah. So
changed.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Iranian regime needs to go, and it needs to be crushed, and it needs to, and that will send waves down the whole world, and it'll change the whole dynamic of balance of power and how people interact with the United States. But that's not going to happen. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And even if it does happen, the military option against Iran will be so weakly exercised. I mean, look
and then there's not pressure for the internal revolution if the boycott doesn't.
Yeah. So the only way to do it is to really fund and arm and support an internal revolution. And again, is that really going to happen? And how successful will that be, given and think about the fact that Russia doesn't have an interest in Iran changing regime, because the threat then is that the new regime will be friendly to the United States. And now the United States will have an ally in Russia who has a southern border with Russia, kind of. I mean, you've got the Caucasus in between, but basically a southern border with Russia. So you've got NATO in Turkey, a American-friendly regime in Iran, south of Russia, and then you've got Poland and the rest of the NATO bloc to Russia's west, and you've almost got Russia surrounded. Russia doesn't want that, and that's part of why Russia's helping prop up the Iranian regime, because it wants to limit America's influence in that region of the world. It wants to maintain its own influence, and it found in both Bush and in Obama, and I think in Trump, it has found weak people on the other side to be able to basically boss around. And I think Russia is the victor. And the fact that America is imposing sanctions is only going to help the Russians and the Iranians get closer to each other. And so the whole thing is a mess, because America has been unprincipled in its relationship with Iran since 1979. Mm-hmm. And you can't make up for that. That is, 38 years or 9 years of unprincipled foreign policy. It doesn't just go away because Donald Trump wishes it to go away. It's there, and no sanctions are all trivialities as compared to the bigger issue of the United States versus Iran, the rise of Islamism, and everything else going on in the Middle East.
So I guess we get to hope that Mr. Negotiator will bring the Europeans or other people back on board with the sanctions. That would be our best hope.
Who's the Mr. Negotiator?
Trump, our president.
Oh, yeah. It still bothers me to hear that combination. But no, I've never seen Trump negotiate. I don't think Trump can negotiate. But no, that's the hope. But I think the chance of that happening is minuscule at this point, unless the Iranians choose to unilaterally withdraw from the deal and start really working on nuclear technology in the open, which would then force the Europeans to join the Americans and so on. I think in the meantime, the Iranians will stick to their part of the deal, and whatever they do, they'll do in hiding, and they'll give no excuse to the Europeans to leave the deal for the 10 years that they're committed to it. They want to accumulate wealth. Oil prices are now high, which is good for the Iranians, and they will accumulate wealth. And then when the deal expires, they will be able to ramp up nuclear technology very, very fast, including their ballistic missile technology. And by then, who knows what will happen with North Korea? Because what round of we'll behave. We'll build another nuclear bomb. There is one new thing that happened in Korea that I didn't see any press about this. I saw this story once, and then nobody else mentioned it, but it strikes me as really, really interesting. So it turns out that the last time the North Koreans did a nuclear test, they do it underground. The facility collapsed. Major damage in this facility where they did the test. It basically, according to the article I read, crippled the entire project. And then, surprise, surprise, the North Koreans are saying, oh no, we're dismantling our nuclear program, or shutting it down or slowing it down. I want to negotiate. All they're doing, it strikes me, I have no special intelligence here, but it seems to me that all they're doing here is they're buying time and an explanation for why they have stopped nuclear tests while they rebuild their facility or move it to somewhere else or whatever it is that they do, so they can start up testing again. But they'll do that only after, yes. I mean, this is the tunnel. I guess Ed says it has been mentioned numerous times. But now it turns out that the damage is much worse than they originally thought. So because of this, I'm speculating that all this negotiating and meeting with Trump and all of this
is prisoners
about buying time so that they can rebuild and then start nuclear testing again. And by that point, we'll have given them money. We'll have sent them a check for a few billion to feed their people, maybe to buy them some tractors or some earth movers. They could build the tunnel better. Maybe Caterpillar will send them a bunch of their equipment. And, because Trump will say, we need
infrastructure.
We need to build infrastructure for North Korea. And then they'll start up production because their facility will be now even better because it'll be being built up with American expertise. So that's your
optimistic outlook.
Likely optimistic and cynical prediction, but one that I think will ultimately prove to be mostly true.
So instead of stopping listening and stopping doing a show and going off and having our last hurrah and fun because the world is coming to an end, we can go on.
I don't believe it's coming to an end. I did not want to imply that. I do believe Iran will have a nuke and the North Koreans will have a nuke, but I don't believe they'll use them.
Okay. Well, that's good at least. So on to Poutweeting. Everybody wants to know what Poutweeting is.
I don't know what Poutweeting is.
Yeah. So every so often, Donald Trump kind of pouts about the way the news media treats him in his tweets. And apparently the tweet that I chose to respond to was one that was focused more on this whole Cohen issue, right? So, basically the whole thing is, were people engaging Cohen, paying this firm that Cohen was associated with because they're trying to get special access to Trump? Yeah. And of course, some Russians were some of the people who were paying. And so maybe there's collusion. This is the latest nothing burger.
Yeah.
So AT&T was one of the companies that paid this firm, this consulting firm. Yeah. And I guess that's what this tweet is really about. But, he tweeted this out last evening, and he says, why doesn't the fake news media state that the Trump administration's antitrust division has been and is opposed to the AT&T purchase of Time Warner in a currently ongoing trial? Such a disgrace in reporting. Now, he is doing this because he's saying, look, I'm not doing anything special for AT&T. In fact, I'm opposing them. So this is proof. Yeah. First of all, it doesn't prove anything along those lines, right? That this particular attempt to curry favor didn't actually work.
I'm not sure, because I think that AT&T paid specifically for help with this particular merger. So it obviously didn't help.
Well, sure. But I mean,
the hatred of Jeff Bezos. And in this case, it's not Jeff Bezos. Sorry. In this case, it's hatred of CNN. Which is owned by Time Warner, far exceeds his friendship with Attorney Cohen.
Sure. So it's just typical pragmatism. It's typical pragmatism.
Yeah, but driven by the emotions. It's a different type of pragmatism, right? It's my hatred exceeds my love of money or my love of this friend. This emotion, my negative emotion is far superior to my positive emotion. More important to me.
I guess so. But in any event,
I liked your response.
Well, and so I take it more at face value. He's got these behind the scenes reasons that he does these things. But, the first thing I thought when I look at this is like, you want to brag about this? You want to brag about the fact that you are interfering in the free market and shutting down this deal that's going to help both of these companies be more profitable, or at least, one of them survive or something, right? So he's out there bragging. He's complaining as to why he's not getting credit in the so-called fake news media for shutting down, interfering with the free market. So my response was, what it was, which was basically saying, look, what they want to do. And I think this is really what the news media would like to do, is they want to label Trump as a capitalist. And then when all of these interventionist policies that he's pursuing fail, meaning have bad effects on the economy, they want to be able to blame it on capitalism like they always want to do. So that's why. Yeah. So I slammed him in a couple ways, but I got one bit of pushback because, it wasn't about that. It's because they refuse to show that, he's really okay politically. Right.
I think that's right. But your point is the more important point, that here he is, so-called defender of capitalism, and he's stopping a merger, and a kind of merger where the antitrust case there's never been really the Justice Department has never objected to a merger of this type, where it's not about market share, it's not about dumping, it's not about pricing, it's about vertical integration and too much power over the vertical, which is bizarre. Anyway, I totally believe that it's a way to slam Time Warner rather than anything else. But
that's his motivation there.
People start leaving as soon as we start slamming Trump.
So do you want to start praising Trump a little bit for his diversion from his campaign promise on prescription drugs? It sounds like he's going a little bit more kind of opening the market as the technique to lower prices versus forcing some sort of price controls on.
Right. Trump is nowhere near as much of a interventionist as he wanted to be when he was running for the campaign. So all of you, not all of you, those who voted for Trump because he promised to clamp down on the prescription drug industry, and he called them evil and one of the great enemies of the United States. Those of you who were inspired by that must be really, really disappointed. But yeah, no, I think he didn't do anything harmful in his talk yesterday about drug pricing.
Oh, wait, there is one thing that looks kind of not good here. Okay, so it says, the New York Times is complaining, of course. It says
because he didn't go far enough. He didn't nationalize the drug company.
Yeah, because he wanted the federal government, or they wanted, the New York Times wanted Trump to have the federal government negotiate lower drug prices for Medicare.
But that's what Trump said he would do when he was running. He said he would allow Medicare. That's the thing he reneged on. He said he would allow Medicare to negotiate, just like the governments he's complaining about here, because he's complaining about European governments getting really, really cheap prices, which is a good complaint. I agree with him on that. But he when he was in campaign, he argued that Medicare should negotiate and therefore drive down drug prices in the United States to be very similar to those in Europe.
Yeah. But then it said he chose not to allow American consumers to import low-cost medicines from abroad. And
well, that's a tough one. It really is tough, but because we in the United States are subsidizing the cheap medicine in these other countries. And then if we import them back, it just creates this. What will happen is, I'm all for that, because what will happen is the drug companies will start limiting the availability of those drugs in Canada. They'll just restrict them. So I think the drug companies have every right to say to, let's say, a Canadian pharmacy, you can buy these drugs from us at this price on condition you don't sell them to Americans.
Right.
Because of the fact that they have a gun pointed to their head by the Canadian government, forcing them to sell it at those low prices. And the only country in which they can actually sell it at a price where they make a little bit of money so that they can then invest in R&D is in the United States. So we in the United States, I've been saying this for 10, 20 years. We in the United States basically subsidize drug development for the entire world. They are all buying their drugs basically at cost. All drug company profits have to be generated in the US. So they all do that. They generate their profits here. Therefore, all drug development is funded by US consumers. And so I believe that you have to allow drug companies then to exclude the ability of somebody in Canada to export his drugs to the
United States. So I agree with you. Allow the drug companies to make that decision. But here they're talking about that Trump will not allow us to buy them.
Because there's been this ongoing for years now. You're not allowed to buy drugs from other countries. The FDA claims that's because they can't guarantee that the quality will be right, which I think is bogus.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the way that what they've done to protect the drug companies. So this is the drug companies lobbying for this, because for them to try to get that from the Canadians, I'm not sure it might be against Canadian law, so it's complicated. I don't think this is a slam dunk. Although, of course, in a free, I think you should be allowed to buy your drugs anyway. But I also believe that the drug companies have a right to protect their only profitable market by restricting the ability of Canadians, let's say, to export it, or Mexicans or Europeans to export drugs.
Very good. So basically, overall, you thought Trump did okay on this issue.
Well, I'm reading this, yeah, I mean, he didn't do harm. Did he change anything in dramatic fashion? Does he liberate free markets? Does he actually do anything to lower drug prices? Like, for example, liberalize the FDA and make it easier to develop drugs? No. No, I mean, the system today is incredibly corrupt, and we can't go into a whole analysis of it, and I don't know that I know enough to go into a whole analysis of it. But the whole way in which the system is structured with Medicare, Medicaid, not Social Security, insurance companies, and then the middlemen, the drug companies, and everybody in between, is definitely overly complex and driven by regulation. I think there's an attempt here to loosen up the regulations so that the market will adjust and make it better.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know enough to be able to say whether this will work or won't work. The guy who's running the Health and Human Services, I've heard, is very good.
Okay.
So, and the guy who ran it before him, Price, who was a former congressman, was very good. But this guy comes out of the drug industry, and I've heard he's very good. So I'm hoping this is right. I'm hoping this is good. I downloaded the PDF of the whole plan. So they issued a document. I started reading it, and but I haven't finished. So I'll try to read it maybe for next time. But it's complicated. It's not easy.
No, none of this could be
stuff. And if I trusted the Trump administration, I said yes, they made it easier. But I don't really trust them. But so I have to read it to really get a sense of whether this makes sense or not. But yeah, they haven't done any harm. Maybe they've done some good. And if there's somebody out there who knows more about this than I do, correct me, please, if you have more insight into what's going on here.
Okay. So maybe at least didn't make anything worse. I mean, for me, the fact that he's not having Medicare go out there and force, yeah. So this is the campaign promise that we want him to break.
Yeah, even Obama didn't do that. I mean, it would be so destructive to the American drug industry that I don't think any president could actually get away with doing it. But yeah, good that he didn't do it in spite of promising it on the campaign trail. Sometimes it's good that Donald Trump doesn't keep his promises.
Yes, definitely. Now, I've got a few issues that I think are just interesting that I got from Volokh Conspiracy. I got over to Volokh Conspiracy because they had a really nice write-up on a Fourth Amendment case by Oren Kerr, and I'm getting all back into that with my privacy stuff. But there's some other issues. They've always got interesting stuff. Yeah. They're over at Reason.
You guys should look them up. It's a blog on the Washington Post, and I know a lot of you
actually know it's at Reason now. They've moved it over to Reason because they wanted it to be away from because there's a paywall at Washington Post. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
So you can read it for free over at Reason.
One of the first things the Washington Post did when Bezos bought them was bring over the Volokh Conspiracy. So
which I thought was great. Yeah, I thought it was great.
Because it's a great blog. And now it's at Reason. All right.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So you can get it over there. So here's one. This is an actual policy proposal that someone put forth in a book. Can we help save democracy by requiring voters to pass a test of political knowledge? So this is sort of related to the idea of having some sort of ideological screening to let people into the country, in my view. But, you've talked on your show a bit before, a little bit about voting and perhaps, and this is something that I agree with, perhaps tying the ability to vote to volunteering for jury duty, give a little and get a privilege. But would you also require them to pass a test of political knowledge?
Well, I would have yes, I would actually. So it would have to be political knowledge, not philosophical knowledge. So it would have to be, how does the system work? What is the separation of powers about? Why was it structured the way it was? And of course, I don't believe in any of this stuff today because it would be corrupt today if they did it. But of course, nobody would be for this today. There's no way this could pass today. And of course, I don't really want to save democracy as in majoritarian rule. I want to save the Constitution in its original vision and the separation of powers in the original vision. So in an ideal world, yes, I think there would be a test for citizenship. And for Americans who were born in America, they would have to pass a test to vote. I also think that voting would be a requirement for jury duty and a requirement for other kind of things. So you would have to, if you wanted to vote, there's certain things you would commit to doing, right? Maybe even, I don't know, I'm just saying this, I know somebody's going to make.
This is talk radio speculation.
Yeah, maybe even you could tie it to revenue raising in some way. Maybe there would be some flat fee to vote, and this would be a way to raise revenue, right? So because I think voting is a derivative right, it's not. So, it would be something that everybody could afford. It would be something pretty cheap, but it would be something that everybody would have to do, and it would be a source of revenue. So maybe this is another way in a free market for government to raise revenue. I don't know, but
or maybe just cover the administrative cost of the poll itself.
But I don't think voting is that important. So I restricting it in those.
It shouldn't be that important, right?
This is the thing about the test. The test should not be ideological. The test should test your knowledge of the system, why it's structured the way it is, what is its purpose, not whether you agree with that purpose or not.
Right.
Just knowledge of. And so I think that should be the test for citizenship. It should be hard. Let me just say, now the test for citizenship today is easy and stupid, and you can memorize it, but the test should be hard, and it should require a real understanding, and that should be for citizenship, and then you get then you can vote, and it should be for Americans born in America, and you get the ability to vote. So since in the original intent of the role of government, voting is not that significant, I have no problems restricting it.
Yeah, I mean, what Ilya Somin in this article.
Ilya's very smart. And
it's excellent, and he says he's not going to completely dismiss the idea of voter testing, but at the same time, he raises the obvious problem, which is that it's hard to trust the government to come up with a test that's objective, politically neutral, et cetera.
This is why I would not advocate for it today. Forget it. So this isn't to save democracy. This is when we reestablish the founding principles of America. Mm-hmm. We include this as a new proposition. But this is what astounds me, truly astounds me, about the people who want a test at the border and advocating for it today. A true, not just a test of knowledge, but a test of ideology, is to give the government today the ability to screen ideologically. I mean, England does that, right? The Brits do that, and they don't allow, Lawrence Summers in. Now, I hate Lawrence Summers, and I think she's despicable in many regards, but she can't go into England. They won't even allow her in because they're using a ideological test. And I think objectivists should be cheering that. Yay.
Do you mean Christina Hoff Sommers?
No, I mean Lawrence Summers.
I don't know who that is. I'm sorry.
Lawrence Summers is an anti-immigration, borderline white, what do they call themselves? Not supremacist, white. Not that there's a difference, but they have this. So she just did a whole series of videos about white genocide in South Africa and things like that. Okay. Because I hate, somebody's asking why I hate Lawrence Summers. Because she's a racist. I'll say it. Because she's a racist. She's an anti-immigration, xenophobic racist. And she perpetuates racist and white nationalist mythologies. So yes, I hate her. Surprise.
So a test on political knowledge,
perhaps. You haven't noticed,
okay.
people, the few people I hate more than racists, right? And people who even approach being racist, identitarians or whatever they call themselves, and white nationalists, and anything that close to that gets me, really, really riled up. So
Rand has a great essay on racism and why it is so incredibly evil and so incredibly anti-American. It just
okay. So the surname is Southern. So it's Lawrence Southern.
Okay, maybe that's why I hadn't heard of the name. Because when you say Summers, I think of Christina Hoffman.
Southern, yeah, Southern.
She's good. So this other story that involves politics, again from Vollett Conspiracy blog, there's an organization called Working Washington. They are calling for the prosecution of Amazon.com. Why? Because Amazon has been using ordinary political tactics. And so the theory is that somehow, I guess there has been some sort of threat to public officials in Washington. Why? Because Amazon says that they are, quote, putting a pause on expanding in Seattle because they want to influence the city council to reject a new 26 cents per hour tax on the largest companies in the city. So I guess if they employ people, they have to pay an extra 26 cents per hour to their employees, but it's a tax for, supporting the city basically. So Amazon now, if they decide that they don't want to proceed with an expansion that essentially amounts to them kind of slitting their throat and sacrificing, then they are undergoing a threat of a lawsuit because supposedly they are threatening the politicians.
They decide not to open a facility that's going to be taxed because of the tax. They will be sued by the city for depriving the city of revenue.
Yes. Well, or, threatening.
Who's advocating for this?
This is a group that is called Working Washington.
Now, this actually, there was an attempt to do something similar, and I don't remember the details, by the Obama administration. So Boeing opened a factory in South Carolina, and they were sued by what's the employment thing within the Labor Department?
NLRB or something. NLRB, yeah.
Because South Carolina is an ununion state, they deprived the union in Seattle of jobs, or some combination like that. So your action to avoid a tax or to avoid the union or to avoid is now deemed as illegal. But I mean, it's just mind-boggling how distorted and corrupt and evil that whole thing is. So
so Amazon's trying to engage in some self-preservation here and avoid a government gun, and because of that supposedly they're going to face a lawsuit. Yep. We don't know what's going to happen with this, but first of all, I hope it wouldn't get very far. Second of all, I really hope that Amazon would not settle this, would not give in to anything like this in any way, because we don't want to set a precedent that somehow, when companies are trying to navigate and run their business the best they can, given the current legal climate, and say, okay, there's a gun pointed at me here and over here and over here. Okay, I think I could do my thing right here with only 5 guns pointed at me instead of 25, right?
Yep. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So I have to comment on some of this. You mentioned immigration and the world ends.
Of course.
I'm just going to do this quickly. Somebody says, you can't call everybody racist who you disagree with about immigration. I don't. I disagree with lots of people around immigration. I only call some of them racist, the ones who are racist. And everything I've seen of Lawrence Southern suggests to me that she is racist in exactly the form of racism. Somebody says she dated a black man. I don't care. There are lots of reasons why she might be dating a black man and still be a racist. And then somebody says you must hate Israel for deporting all those brown Africans. Yeah, I do. I think it's horrible that Israel deported them. They were doing no harm to anybody. They were actually quite productive and working for a living. And so I do resent the fact that Israel deported all those brown Africans. Just the fact that you call them brown Africans. I mean, what the hell? And what else? my suspicion is, and I'm not going to call you guys racist bringing this up, but yeah, I mean, you can't, because the left uses that term indiscriminately, doesn't mean that it's not a term that should be used when they are racist. So were there people who are xenophobic, or were there people who are distinguishing people based on race, then they should be called racist. And when people are nationalist or ethnocentric or whatever, those are racist. And somebody asked me if Black Lives Matter is racist. Of course it's racist. I mean, unfortunately, much of the Black community is racist. And, there's a lot of racism in the world around us, and it's horrible. It's part of what I see as the most important feature of the decline of the West. Racism that started out with started out with racism, and then got picked up by the left as identity politics, and so now boomeranging. Is that right? Boomeranging back to the right in the form of all kinds of identitarian, if that's a word, kind of policies. So yeah, the world today, sadly, is and a lot of the nationalism is disguised racism, and a lot of the anti-Muslims is disguised racism. And don't give me the bullshit about, I'm not talking about you, Amy, I'm talking to them about Islam, but I think some of the anti-Islam is, some of it, not all of it, is disguised racism. I think there's a lot of racism out there. You disagree with me, great, disagree with me, but that's the way we're heading in terms of where the world is heading, and it's sad, and it's depressing, and it's scary.
Yeah, I mean, people are getting more collectivist. There was a piece from New York Times, and I thought it was interesting, but I didn't see how to cram it into my alliterative title. And it's kind of a big topic. But it was a woman who was writing in reaction to the piece that they did on the intellectual dark web. And she was talking about ways that the left, in certain ways, has fueled the fire of some of the extreme right-wing elements, not necessarily the dark web. Like, for instance, I think she was going to be debating Jordan Peterson, so it's not like, she's saying, oh, these are all horrible, evil people you shouldn't deal with. But like she said, for instance, she wouldn't debate Milo, for example. But, the left, with the whole identity politics thing and stuff, has given fuel to some of that.
The left created the alt-right. Mm-hmm. The left created the backlash. The left created, to a large extent, the alienation that resulted in the election of Trump. The left created the distrust of globalism, because the left wanted to take globalization, a good economic strategy, and turn it into a one world government, or some people in the left wanted. And that gave the excuse for Trumpism to throw out the baby with the bathwater, to reject one world government, but also reject trade per se. So there's no question, and this comes right out of dim hypothesis, right? It's the disintegration of the nihilistic left. And this is why I often say that I'm less afraid of nihilism than I am afraid of the right, because nihilism will not catch on. Nihilism is not a strategy for governing. Nihilism is not a strategy for life. Nihilism is a strategy for suicide. And the fact is that most people don't want to commit suicide. An overwhelming majority of people, particularly Americans, do not want to be suicidal, do not want to die, do not want to slit their own throat. And therefore, so this is my simplistic explanation of a deep idea that Leonard Peikoff develops in DIM. And so people will never adopt this nihilistic, hating, self-destructive, suicidal ideology, and it cannot become a governing ideology. And you saw that with Obama. As nihilistic as Obama was, and I don't think he's quite as nihilistic as some of these people, but he was on the nihilistic side of things. Mm-hmm. He couldn't really implement anything. He couldn't really get anything done. And there was a huge backlash whenever he tried to do it. Think about all the people who hated Obamacare, which was not as nihilistic as it could have been. But even though they didn't understand it and they didn't know what they were for, but they just hated it. He couldn't get it done. They hated him because of the nihilism he projected. It's not a governing ideology. It cannot actually win. What I'm afraid of is not the nihilism. What I'm afraid of is the backlash, mm-hmm. the misintegration, what Leonard calls M2, which is the backlash to nihilism. And that is racism, nationalism, theocracy.
Right.
It is the elevation of some misintegration, a false way to integrate. Nationalism is a good one, which is rising in Europe. In the United States, it might be more centered around religion. We will see. But yeah, it's that kind of, it's the backlash on the so-called right, which is what scares the bejesus out of me more than the nihilism of the left. The nihilism of the left needs to be fought, and it's relatively easy to fight them. The horror of the right is much harder to fight, and it's much more attuned to the American sense of life. Make America great again. Oh my God, who can be against that? We all want to make America great again. Right. But if what you mean by that is a misintegration, right? It's a misintegration about what America really means. It's a misintegration about placing America above the individual. Then it's a very, very, very dangerous idea, and in some ways more dangerous than the nihilism. So the problem is nihilism, which is pushing Americans to embrace, I think, long-term, not now, and I don't think Trump is it, but long-term, some form of authoritarianism, which is much scarier. And that's why, and I'll say it again, I've said it many times, that's why I spend most of my time, maybe more than what people want, fighting the right, fighting the manifestations of M2 on the right, fighting manifestations of misintegration and authoritarianism on the right.
Definitely. So then Trump with his pragmatism, he's not really M2 himself, but you think he's enabling that?
Yeah, Trump is a complete pragmatist. Trump is a nothing. Ideologically, he can't be. He's much more of a D in many respects, a D disguising himself as an M, which is kind of an interesting, first time I've thought of that. But I think that's what he is. I'd have to ask.
Or like a D enabling the M a little bit, maybe. I don't know.
And also, but disguising himself as one, because he pretends to be a big integrator. He pretends to be, but he really is a complete pragmatist, 100% pragmatic. Yeah, I don't think he is the M2, but I think he is.
By the way, M2 people would be religious, right? Theocratic, basically, right?
Or it could be
a nationalist.
Nationalists or real nationalists, or anybody who figured out some bad fundamental core idea to integrate everything around the nation, the race, God.
Right.
God is more powerful and has more sustaining power.
Right.
That is the greater danger. Somebody's asking, I mentioned one world government. Are you opposed to that per se? Yes, I'm opposed to one world government per se. You know, unless you have another government on Mars and on the moon and in the belt. I'm watching this science fiction series where there are three powers: Earth, which is run by the United Nations. There's a scary thought for you. Mars, which was a colony of Earth but is now independent, and the belt, which is kind of the belters, which are rebelling against the domination by Earth and Mars. So it's a really cool series. I can't remember what it's called right now. But yeah, I'm opposed to. By the way, if you really want a question, we should go back to this. If you want to ask a question, super chat, guys. Super chat. $2 and you get my attention. $20, you really get my attention. $50, you get Amy's attention.
I don't even have super chat on my channel, so you get my attention.
Here's my sci-fi recommendation of the day, The Expanse. I'm really enjoying it. I'm on season 3 now. I thought season 1 and 2 were good. I'm afraid it's going to go downhill because as soon as you get to the part where you have to really deal with the sci-fi part, with kind of the alien or the mystical or whatever, then it goes off the rails. But so far, it's been very good, and it's been focused on characters. I really like shows that have good character development, that are character centric, and The Expanse is I'm really enjoying it. Really enjoying it. Anyway,
okay.
Hey, super chat waiting. No super chats. Nobody wants to ask a question. All right.
Okay. So I was going to zoom into privacy related stories next because I'm going back to my book on privacy, do my little pitch, but because we're talking about this and Trump's pragmatism, I wanted to bring up Jordan Peterson's pragmatism a little bit after your discussion of his sort of misunderstanding of self-interest yesterday. And I watched, that whole April Q&A of his, and the thing that, got me out of it was something that ties into this other idea of provinciality, which is probably going to make people upset because I'm with you on the globalism, and provinciality is something that I was thinking about over my vacation. But let's go back to Peterson, right? Because so Peterson,
traveling causes you to think about provinciality, doesn't it?
It does. Of course, it really does.
It's going to be part of my theme at Ocon this year.
Excellent. No, but for me, it was provinciality in the dimension of time, right? So that for me, I was a math major and my history education is not that good anyway, but everything that we see online is asking us to react to the latest and loudest and be all upset about the latest little political development about this. And there was this special election here. And what does it mean for the GOP? And you're just supposed to have a heart attack every day about the latest little blip on the political radar. And when you do get a sense of history, which you can on certain types of vacations anyway, not if you just go on some cruise and eat at the buffet or something, but if you look at some art that spans history like I did, and I got this sense again, I was reminded that there's at least a few hundred years of stuff that we need to take into account before we analyze the latest blip on the radar. So that was my take of provinciality. There was a Peterson quote that plays into that, but let's talk about Peterson and his pragmatism a little bit, because the question is, like, we could say, okay, well, Trump's pragmatism is potentially dangerous to us because he has so much power as president of the United States, and it's, government animated by pragmatism, which is a scary thing because there's not any principle on which it operates. And the pragmatists say whatever works, and really what they do, if they're good pragmatists, if you read your James, is they are reacting to demands that they are presented with. And any demand is as good as any other for the pragmatist. We were talking about Trump earlier. His demand from himself that he hates Time Warner is going to trump, to purposefully use the word, it's going to trump anything that he thinks would be good by hands off the free market, so to speak, right? He's going to go ahead and intervene. But what's the danger of an avowed pragmatist like Peterson having, so much success in the political realm? For example, Peterson, as you noted yesterday, he sounds so reasonable. He has good advice for people on so many topics. And at the same time, his whole set of ideas is animated by this pragmatism. And for him, the standard of whatever works is, as far as I can understand, the success of the species on an evolutionary scale. So, why is he for individualism? Because he recognizes at a certain level that the individual human being must survive in order to, I guess, reproduce and be an effective father or mother, and propagate the species and all of this stuff, right? So, but if you listen to him talk with Sam Harris, his standard of the true and the good is what eventually ends up working out for the success of the human species, right? And so I'm
not sure he fundamentally disagrees. I mean, he does and doesn't with Sam Harris, because Sam Harris' definition of what's fundamentally good is also what's good for the species at the end of the day. They're both, in that sense, altruists at the end of the day. But I think the danger is, I don't know, I have to think this through. But first, I think the danger is that he basically is telling young people, very effectively, by the way, that the alternative to hedonism and nihilism is pragmatism. And that's very dangerous, right? Because that's what he's telling you.
It's interesting because he's not doing exactly that. So there's layers of this, right? So when you read his book, and again, I have to read Maps of Meaning to fully get him. That's one of the challenges with Peterson is, he's such an intellect, and to really try to unpack what he's getting at.
Well, I have to say though, I was listening to his discussion with Ben Shapiro yesterday night. So they had he was the first person Ben Shapiro has interviewed on his new Sunday show.
Right. Yeah.
Very well produced and beautifully done and everything. And the first 7 minutes, everybody should watch it. First 7 minutes, you'll see why Peterson is so popular, because he's brilliant. He's great. He's right on. He's crushes the left. He shows them for what they are. Great. First 7 minutes is good. And I have to say, I don't know, at around minute 30, I can't remember the exact point, the mumbo jumbo psychobabble BS that this guy spouts. Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm just being stupid. But to me, it's BS. I mean, he says stuff that means, I think, nothing. Really, it's like yesterday when he says, your self-interest is self-interest of everything, of everybody, of the world,
Well, but I mean, I think in a way he believes that in the sense of,
oh no, but it's
his standard of truth and the good is the eventual success of the human species on the planet. And he truly believes that, for example, a totalitarian ideology is the enemy of that.
Yeah, but the species doesn't really exist in the metaphysical sense for him, right? What exists in a metaphysical sense? Because he said, we create our own metaphysics, and he said on the show with Shapiro,
I have to watch it.
We create our own truth based on what we need, right? That's pragmatism. We create our own truth. The truth is what we need it to be, right? So science is not verifiable because it is reflective of reality, objective reality out there. There is no objective reality out there. Science is verifiable because it's true, because it works for us. So it serves a need, in other words, that we have in order to survive, or whatever the thing is, but it's not clear what survival means. I mean, this is the problem. When you have a bad philosophy, nothing makes sense when you really dig deep. So I think there's nothing there. I don't think I think, yes, he's very smart. He's very articulate. He's very knowledgeable. He communicates brilliantly. He has some basic, decent advice. I wonder about the advice as well. His idea of chaos and control is not a bad metaphor for a lot of things in the world, but other people have used it. It's entropy. People use entropy to explain a lot of these things. What's his name? Anyway, other people have used it. I've seen it used in economics. I've used it in psychology. I used it to explain the world and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, he's teaching people, yes, to be pragmatic, and he's not teaching them principles. He's anti-principles.
Well, but this is the interesting thing, right?
To fail. Yeah. And when they fail, what are they going to go to? They've been presented with only two alternatives, I think: pragmatism and nihilism. So where do they go from that? And I think where they go from that is to religion, because I think that's the only alternative ultimately to the failure of pragmatism, is they look for some principles because they need principles, and the only people to actually provide them with principles that are somewhat consistent with what Peterson does, because he couches everything in terms of religion, is ultimately to go to religion. So I think what he's also doing is training a whole generation to one day become even more religious than.
Well, right, But he has an explicit invitation to that in his book in a number of places. And so he basically, as I understand him, there's a couple of things. First of all, is that he thinks that it's almost as if a religious belief system or some sort of instincts that are consistent with religious belief are in us. It's like they evolved in us in a certain way, and that they are consistent with and they help us survive on this evolutionary scale, which is his standard of truth and good. So it's not so much that he believes in it, but that he believes it's good for the species to act as if it's true.
Well, but that's enough.
You've done damage. Right. And right? so he'll tell you.
Very influential, and you're very influential in millions of young people, particularly young men. And you're giving them what I think are, to a large extent, superficial explanations. And to get to the deep explanations, to get to the real explanations, they're going to have to delve into religion. Then, oh my God, what you're really building here is a religious army. Now, I don't want to get too panicky about it, because I don't know quite exactly what to make of the phenomenon. But I met a kid in Ukraine or somewhere, maybe it's Ukraine, who told me, yeah, I was an atheist, and Peterson has made me, has convinced me to become a Christian again. So,
if you analyze Peterson closely, at least in 12 Rules, he doesn't give you any evidence, of course, at all, for making that leap of faith. He'll say essentially, well, your life hasn't been going so well. What could you lose by choosing to guide it as if this interpretation of Christianity is true? Go ahead and try it, see what happens.
Yeah, and what about the whole idea that he never really is an advocate for reason? Not, he's
number of times in the book he questions the efficacy of rationality. For people who want to know, I've got 5 hours where I go through Peterson's book and talk about it, and I point this out. Yeah.
Watch the Ben Shapiro interview. Watch what he talks about the Enlightenment. So he always talks, the Enlightenment's great. The Enlightenment says, so then Ben pushes him a little bit because Ben claims to be a man of the Enlightenment and an advocate of reason, right? And I believe Ben believes in reason. Of course, he undercuts it by his Orthodox Judaism than Jordan is. So then Jordan goes into this whole thing about why the Enlightenment was the Enlightenment. And it's a bunch of mystical googly gaw. I mean, there's nothing about the discovery of reason. There's nothing about Greece. Nothing. That's the astounding thing about it, Peterson. He talks about mythology, but the mythology that actually means something, the mythology that actually launched mankind into grandeur is Greek mythology. It's not just Greek mythology, it's Greek literature. It's Homer and the Iliad and but he never talks about that because it undercuts his whole story about the importance of Christianity. But he never links the Enlightenment to the Renaissance to Greece. And of course, Ben is happy because Ben doesn't want it to link to Greece. He wants to link it to Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. But Jordan doesn't even link it to Jerusalem. I didn't understand a word he said. And look, maybe it's my ignorance. Maybe I need to read Jung, which I don't think I ever will, but maybe I need to read Jung, to understand what the hell he's talking about.
Or maps of meaning, just to see what he takes from Jung, right?
It sounds like maps of meaning is really hard to read, and I don't have the patience for it. But
he's making an audio book of it, which I could not imagine being able to take in something as hard as that by audio. I can't even take Opar by audio.
I don't do anything by audio. Really, even novels, I find myself drifting and then I have to rewind and find the spot where I last, it's just, I can't do it. So I need to read. I need to read it.
And I need to mark it up and
yes, exactly.
Got to do all that stuff. So, I'll give you a concrete of his from that Q&A that just give you an idea of his pragmatism. He was answering to a woman who was saying, what do you say to women who waited too long to have kids and now they can't have kids, and how do they fill their life? And he talks about, some common sense advice, things that they can do to have meaning in their lives apart from having children, etc. But he was characterizing these women as being in some sense a product of their time, our time being that there is reliable birth control available. And so therefore it enables us to make this decision not to have kids, and he talks about that it causes women to make the wrong decision.
Yeah. It's intrinsically right.
Yes.
Have children because you have the biological capacity and the evolution necessity, for the species to have children. So not to have children is by definition the wrong choice.
Yes. So that just gives you an example, right? So that the rightness and wrongness doesn't have to do with us using our rational faculty to make choices about how to direct our lives. There's no necessity of participation of that faculty in the decision for someone like Peterson to label that decision right or wrong. So, if you listen to him really closely, he reveals his foundations a little bit each way, but he is so articulate and he speaks quite quickly. There's so much coming at you that you have to really stop and listen and sometimes rewind and whatever to get where he's laying that in. Because it's not wrong. A woman should not say, I made the wrong decision, unless she could point, to something that she actually consciously evaded at the time. She chose, to ignore something deliberately at the time that would have shown that having a child was in her interest. But there's plenty of women who they think, it is in their interest to not have kids, and then later they come to regret that decision. It doesn't mean that what they did at the time was wrong.
Yeah. I'm just smiling because I'm thinking of Ayn Rand's response to that. Could you imagine how she would blow up at that? She would deck him. She would put him on the ground. I mean, he would be completely emasculated if he had to debate Ayn Rand on that point.
And that's why we'd say, how can he say that he is a friend of individualism?
He isn't.
When
you can't be a friend of individualism and believe Jesus Christ is a superhero, the ultimate superhero. Forget it. That is the ultimate altruism, anti-individualist morality. And this is why people yesterday, I saw a lot of critique, right? So the critique was, I'm quibbling on little things. Like he said, I'm stuck with my wife. Oh no, he's other places he said how much he loves his wife. But the fact is he's against divorce. So he believes you should be stuck with your wife. Whether you love her or not, you made a commitment, you should be stuck.
He's not 100% against divorce, but he has a hell of a high threshold for it, right?
High threshold. Yeah. So, and Ben Shapiro is, of course, against divorce. They agree on that. Right. They agree on the danger of birth control and all of that because it allows for more sex and not enough procreation. They both agree on that. No, I mean, the fundamental deep ways in which he's anti-life and anti the individual, and that's his danger. The danger with Jordan Peterson is that he is perceived as the defender of the individual, perceived as the rational alternative to nihilism, perceived as not a mystic but a man of science, and therefore, and when he fails,
and he's also just he's a charismatic person who is talking about important ideas and important issues, and particularly, psychology. People are just hungry for advice about how to make their lives better and stuff. And he offers this. I remember at one point, there was some interview where he said something like he can't actually believe that people are, giving his ideas that much attention. I think he knows how radical some of his ideas, that the core starting point in ethics is that suffering is bad, and it's about alleviating suffering versus, being motivated by love. But, there's so much you could talk about with Peterson, but there's just one question that came to my mind, and then we can just leave this topic and just think about it. It was that, is it good for human beings to use their rational faculty to supersede, to overcome their biology and to overcome, whatever is built into us because of evolution and everything else. And so that's where the core divide is. So people who say, oh, well, Jordan Peterson and Ayn Rand are saying the same thing, and you just really don't understand Peterson well enough. They are not. Peterson is trying to couch everything in you following what is in built in you to make you successful on an evolutionary scale. And he thinks that the advice that religion gives happens to go along with it very nicely in a certain interpretation of it. But, this idea that we can use our reason to supersede our, physical beings and the things that are in us physically to have a good life, to enjoy life, to be happy.
The whole point is not to succumb to evolution. Evolution sucks. Evolution doesn't care about your personal happiness. Evolution doesn't care about...
if you get cancer, maybe you're supposed to die of cancer on an evolutionary scale. How dare you get treatment and live your life for 10 more years?
Women go through menopause, they're useless. Just kill them all. What do you need them for? Somebody says grandmothers. We evolved to care about grandmothers. Bullshit. You don't need them. Out. So no, the whole point of reason is to overcome. It's to be more. It's to give us the ability to override anything we might be programmed with. It's to choose. It's to actually use our free will to choose our values that are not now dictated by the arbitrariness of the sense or by the dictates of the functioning of nature. No, in every respect, human beings are there to change nature to fit themselves. Indeed, we will be able to, within a few generations, go into our genetic code and change what we evolved. We'll be able to change the genes and take some out and put others in. Based on what? Based on, hopefully, based on reason. But so there's no evolutionary dictate on which gene should go out and which should end. Evolution says, evolution is true, therefore you can't change your genes. No, we're going to change them. We're going to completely dictate what we are, who we are, biologically, because we have the capacity to reason and have capacity to choose. So Yes, you know, women who don't want babies shouldn't have babies. They get to choose. That's the beauty of it. And there's nothing wrong with that choice if it's done rationally. There's nothing wrong with the choice of having babies if it's done rationally. And there's lots wrong with the choice to have babies if it's done irrationally. Mm-hmm. If it's done for Jordan Peterson's reasoning, if it's done for the sake of the species, then it's irrational and wrong and immoral. Don't have kids, please, if you're doing it for the
But again, this is rational and irrational, judged by the standard of the happiness of the individual, the one who's making the choice for their lives. And he doesn't believe that that it's good for us to use this rational faculty that we got. And, you know, we got it, however, we got it evolutionary. But the fact is that we have it. It gives us the ability to depart in certain ways from our biology and our psychology and other things, and to make choices to make our lives better and to live them on principle. And the question is, do you think that that is a valid path for life or not? And he says no, and we say yes. No, and as much as he sounds like he says yes, sometimes he says no. And to me, that's the biggest danger with Peterson.
No, I think that's right. And again, the other part of it is he's definitely got this malevolent sense of life. He's got this whole idea about suffering. He's got, you know, so
reason can help you transcend suffering.
Yeah, but the core, the metaphysical reality is suffering, and we're going to transcend it somehow. But we're only going to transcend it. We're not going to achieve happiness, because happiness just either happens to you or doesn't happen to you. And if you got it, you know, good for you, but it's just an accident in a sense. So, no, I mean, the more we talk, the less I like Peterson. But yes,
I'm sorry.
He's very, no, I came to this conclusion yesterday. I was actually chatting.
I've been accused of, like, you know, being too positive about Peterson. And in some ways I would like to really be positive, but I am somewhat worried about him.
I've been accused of being too positive, and I've been accused of being too negative from different people, of course, but you know, I piss everybody off. I'm not open enough on immigration, and I'm not closed enough on immigration. I want to bomb Iran, but I don't want to nuke every Muslim out of existence. You know, I'm too middle of the road. That's my problem in life. I'm too, for most objectivists, I'm just too middle of the road.
Well, and then the other thing is, you know, to the extent that I'm sitting here criticizing Peterson's ideas, is this really his intention? You know, because I'm analyzing him from my perspective.
No, he seems like a good guy, and he seems
exactly.
honest, exactly. But the ideas are bad ideas, and at the end of the day, you also have to judge people based on their ideas. You know, fact and value, right? So the ideas are bad, and I think the consequences are bad, and to some extent,
potentially,
showing us what I think is interesting. Is he showing us that the millions of young people who are willing to give up the nihilism they've been taught and to embrace something different? Now, are they willing to embrace something different that actually challenges them to think and to choose values and to embrace happiness, like we would suggest? Or are they going for Peterson because it's easy and it doesn't require too much hard work, mental work from them? I don't know. But if we can somehow get in there, you know.
I mean, a lot of the advice that he gives is about making your own individual life better. And it's because he thinks, at least up to a certain point,
that's important.
Helping the individual lead a better life. So this is where you could say, okay, his pragmatism is maybe in a lot of ways better than Trump's pragmatism, because at least his evolutionary perspective values the survival of the individual up to a certain point, when when they're still able to contribute to the propagation of the human species or whatever it is, which could be when their grandmother's still and everything like that, right? You can still help out with the kids.
I mean, there's a huge difference. I mean, I don't even put them on the same plane, right? Peterson is a real intellectual. He has real ideas that have to be confronted,
and a valuer.
And as an intellectual, the plane is reason. We debate it based on reason. He doesn't silence people. He doesn't yell at people. Doesn't insult people. He really seems to respect a reasoned discussion. Trump is a anti-intellectual buffoon. I mean, so he's a completely different. He ridicules the intellectual. He ridicules thought. He ridicules reason. So he, you know, Trump is the manifestation of, well, I'm not going to say it. Anyway.
Yeah, no. Anyway, Peterson, again, in certain ways will express reservations about the validity of the senses and the power of rationality and all those things too, but he just does it in an extremely sophisticated way. And I'm not sure, as I said, I tend to like Peterson. And so I don't think his goal is to go out there and destroy the rational faculty and, kind of push people into some sort of ideology. He explicitly says he's against that, but again, his ideas seem to push.
Somebody here asked, but then who decides the good and what is good if the continuation of species is not good? The continuation of species is irrelevant. I mean, it might be good.
It's not irrelevant. It's good. I mean, I wouldn't want to be here and have no rest of the human species.
But nobody in deciding whether to be honest or not, the consideration is not the continuation of the species. The standard of value is your life. Now, if my value is my life and your standard value is your life, and the people in the chat standard value is their life, then the species will survive because each one its own standard. So and we all have an interest in the species surviving, but it's not what guides our action. What guides our action is our own life. And we all do a good job in surviving as individuals, the species will do fine.
Except we won't have enough kids for Peterson. That's his problem. But
yeah, so the species might shrink, it might expand. Right. It's not, is it a numbers game? I mean, that's also bizarre, right? Why is it a numbers? Why is more of the species better than less of the species? I don't know. I mean, for me personally, as an egoist, I want more people in the world. The more, the better. Because the more geniuses there are, the more productive people they are, the more that. But once you get into thinking, I want to do what's good for the species, then hey, let's force women to have kids, and let's put the people who are asocial into the gulags, and let's arrange society in a way that maximizes what's good for the species. Very, very dangerous thinking ultimately. No, what we're about is what's good or bad is what's good or bad for the individual's life.
Yes.
Or human life, qua human. Yes. And that's true of everybody in the species. The same values that are good for me, the same moral values that are good for me are good for you, they're universal. They're good for every person on the planet. There's a universality of moral values.
And it's why, because we have this rational faculty that, as objective.
Well, because we're all human, and we're all the same species. Mm-hmm. And what is distinct about our species is our rational faculty. Therefore, reason is a universal value to everybody, no matter where they live.
Yep, and that's the faculty that he discounts the value of. So I'll just say a couple things about this privacy issue, and then I'll circle back to the theme of the provinciality that I took from Peterson. Again, one of the appeals of Peterson is that he just talks about interesting things and he gets your mind going on things that are personally important to you. I think that's one of his appeals. But I've got a couple privacy stories. One of them is just a piece of good news. I actually posted a piece of news while I was on my vacation because it was good. We have the tech giants, Apple, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Verizon, and also some company called Oath, which is the parent company of Yahoo, all fighting the government because the government is trying to force backdoors into the encryption technology of these tech companies. And so I want people to remember in particular that Facebook has been accused of being, people who want totalitarianism or some authoritarianism. Facebook is one of the companies that is fighting the government on this issue. And I just want to give some moral support and say kudos and thanks to these companies for continuing to fight for this, because I believe quite strongly, and this is something I'm going to talk about in my book in an extended way, that technologies like encryption will put us back in the place that we should be, which is that if the government wants to know private information about you, they should have to come to you with a warrant. So I've got this phone and it's becomes a brick unless you put the right passcode in it or whatever. They can't get the information out of it. They should have to come to me and say, hey, here's a proper warrant. Now give us the passcode and whatever. We could talk about what kind of warrant it should be. Is it Fifth Amendment, whatever? That's a whole legal thing. But now the way that the law is, the government can be lazy. They can go to Apple, they can go to Facebook instead of coming directly to you with that warrant and get the information that they want. And they shouldn't be able to do that. You should be able to have the equivalent of your house with a key that only you have, and the government has to present the warrant to you actually to get that information.
Absolutely. So you own your own information. You own the data that you produce. Nobody else owns it. But but you're right. That's going to take a whole change in legal regime, but it's great to see some of these.
Well, currently it's legal, right? Currently it's legal, and the politicians hate it because we actually have some power over our own lives and our personal information, and they don't want us having that. They want their toys, they want their tools.
But it's good that the tech companies once in a while have the right position on these kind of things.
Well, they know that, particularly post Snowden, that this is a marketing tool, at least for them, and Jobs was very good on this, that he wanted Apple customers to believe that they could trust their private information to the company. It was very important to him. And I see that Tim Cook is continuing that as well. So if people want to go to the blog, don't let it.
Super chat. If you want to ask questions, We need money. Nobody has done a super chat today.
So my pitch is, if you support me on Patreon, you're going to be supporting me in writing my privacy book. If you want to see the privacy related stories,
So suspended Patreon. Are you back on?
Well, I paused it and now I'm configuring what I'm doing.
Go contribute.
Yeah.
Super chat here and go contribute to my Patreon site, Yaron Brook Show, Amy Peikoff, and Patreon. What else do we want them to do? Subscribe to our YouTube channels and share. All right. What else, Amy?
Those are things we want. Okay. So, again, go to my blog, don'tletitgo.com, if you want to check out these program notes in more detail. The story that brought me to the Vault Conspiracy blog.
What's RUB?
RUB?
Is that ruble?
Ooh, could be. Kind of cool.
I don't know. What 100 ruble? What is that? $1?
I have no idea what the conversion is, right? Maybe I'll let you do that. Well, I capitulate this. So just to give people an idea, there has been some sort of evolution in the law recently about what can the government search of your devices at the border without a warrant or some sort of particularized suspicion, some sort of level of suspicion. And there's a Fourth Amendment case that seems to be requiring that the government have some sort of suspicion, some level of suspicion. It declined to say how much because they used what they call a good faith exception. But your cell phone. If you bring a cell phone across the border, the government is going to have to present some sort of reasonable suspicion. Moreover, in this Fourth Circuit case, it's just a Fourth Circuit case. It's not the Supreme Court yet. In this Fourth Circuit case, the court said that the government has to, in an individual case, on a case-by-case basis, decide that the reason for a border search exception to the Fourth Amendment, there's some sort of risk of something dangerous coming across the border, right? So they don't have to have a warrant. The reason for that has to actually be applicable in the individual case. So it's not, some kind of broad categorical rule that anything that comes across the border is subject to search without any type of suspicion. You have to have some level of individualized suspicion. And you have to show that the rationale for this border search exception, the rationale for not having a warrant requirement at the border, that it applies in the particular case. So I was telling someone who's planning to come for OCON in the summer, a listener to our show, I was saying, hey, I don't think you're going to have any real problem arriving, say, in the Ninth Circuit. Ninth Circuit, I believe, is the circuit that gave us Riley, which is this case that talks explicitly about all the personal stuff that's on our phones and accords it a high level of deference and saying, that the government should have to present some decent level of suspicion. We don't know what that is yet, but I do know that I think that these agents are going to be more careful now that this case law is coming down. So that's good.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like there's some better legal stuff happening on the issue of privacy out there, and a lot of this go to the Supreme Court, so it'll be interesting to see what the ultimate outcome of all this is going to be.
Yeah, one of the commenters on that blog, Oren Kerr is excellent over at the Vault Conspiracy. They made this interesting comment, which is that what are they concerned about having come across the border? Because you can just Dropbox and send or whatever digital information across the border,
it makes no
more
difference
than you
where
could
the
ever.
phone is.
Yeah. So, you would have to have some sort of reasonable suspicion about that particular person and, what they're bringing it for and all that kind of stuff. It just only makes sense.
Yep.
So, yeah, so this is a whole area in flux. I'm waiting to hear what the Supreme Court does in Carpenter, et cetera. So let's go back, because this is going to be, again, you said provinciality is one of the things you want to talk about in your.
Yeah, and we've only got, we're already at an hour and a half. So.
Oh, we are. So we got to go. Huh?
Do provinciality? Let's do provinciality and end with that.
Okay. No, that's what I wanted to end with. Although I'm afraid maybe here's a can of worms. This was the quote from Jordan Peterson about that case that I described to you, the woman who took the birth control. And so he says this woman is a product of her time. And so the quotation from him is, to be a product of your time is in some ways a catastrophe. That's what he says. Now, in certain ways it's true, but that, this is again the appeal to Peterson, right? In certain ways it's true, but in some ways, no, it's false, because of course we want to take the best advantage of all the things that the time that we live in.
And for pragmatists, that's pretty contradictory, right? Because being a product of your time is exactly pragmatism, right? It's to do what works right now, right here at this point in time. And it might not be right before, and it might not be right afterwards, but right now, right here, this is right. And that's the way in which he's not a conventional pragmatist. He's this complex.
The evolutionary scale, yeah.
Because he thinks in terms of the long term. He doesn't think about the now. But yeah, no, I've come to the conclusion, most people, including myself, almost everybody, it's very hard to break out of provinciality. It's very hard to gain perspective for those of us talking about politics and history and philosophy. It's very hard to lose historical perspective about what's going on in the world. And I can't remember if I told you, but I've told this story before. That when I went to China for the first time in 2004, and I saw the vibrancy and the energy and the success and the progress and the building and everything that was going on there, and the thought that occurred to me was, I've missed out on history, right? In 100 years, in 200 years, people looking back at this period in time won't care if Bush got elected or Kerry got elected. They won't care what was going on in the US. It'll be a footnote, but there'll be a chapter on China, because what happened in China changed the world. It was revolutionary for the lives of the people there, for the lives of the people surrounding them, for everybody's life. It changed everything. And we are so focused on we're right here, particularly Americans. Americans are the most provincial people in the world, I think. Well, not the most, but very provincial, certainly among the Western countries. We live here. We think we live in the greatest country ever. We think it's always going to be the greatest country. All we know is about us. We dabble in the little minutiae of American politics, not that any of it really matters in the big picture. We ignore what's going on in Europe. We don't really care. We certainly ignore what's going on in Asia. They look different and they are different. And who cares about Africa? We have no clue what's over there. And our whole lives are centered around, our political lives and our ideological lives around the little minutia of Jordan Peterson says that, Jordan Peterson says here, where's the world going to? And, it's very hard for us to take a perspective that's global. It's very hard for us to step back and say, wait a minute, I live in America, but should I live in America? Is America the best place to live? Are there places that are better to live for me right now? What about people in Amsterdam? We think socialism is so bad, but they've got more socialism in America, but life in Amsterdam is pretty good. People seem to live there pretty well. Amy was just in Amsterdam. She had a good time. People seem happy, although I found them looking a little miserable in Amsterdam. But
maybe the weather was bad that day.
But generally, it's all we see is a little place on the planet, and we don't have a global perspective, even for our own lives in the context of our own values. Should I, maybe I should go to China. It's dynamic, it's exciting, and they want English speakers. There are real opportunities to make a job. Why are we so afraid? If I were young, I'd consider it, and I think young people should consider it.
Well, not that now that he's the dictator for life. I don't know about China, but yeah.
True. And then there's history, right? And then there's historical context of where we've come from and how much we've advanced and what's taken place. And we're so obsessed with things are so bad right now. Oh my God. You know, are they that bad? Really? Are they that bad? When you go back to Amsterdam and you go to Anna Frank's home and you live, you kind of get a glimpse of what it must have been like hiding from the Nazis for months and months and months, and then dying, of course, and then being murdered by them. Is life that hard in America today? Are we really at the end of the rope? Or then if you go and look at the grandeur of the 19th century, it gives you a little perspective of where we are today. So Americans need to travel. They need to get that perspective, and they need to be less provincial, and they need to think more globally. But of course, now to think globally, you're a globalist. That's evil. That's bad, because they've created this package deal between globalization and one world government. But no, you've got to have a much broader perspective on life than I think.
And for me, the provinciality and the thing that this Peterson quote brought up for me was the dimension of time, not to be so provincial in the dimension of time. And, as I said, not overreact to the latest and loudest is the way that some of the productivity gurus would talk about it. Don't just be so reactive to the latest and loudest, but keep in mind the context. And especially if we're engaged in this battle for, trying to spread the right ideas, to figure out what's important. Now, I think Peterson is important to engage just because, God, he's such a huge bestseller, and there is this intellectual movement, and
but it's not the Peterson stuff. I don't think is the loudest, and I think where you get provincial is, I was watching a debate going on about the FBI, right? The FBI is doing this, and the FBI helped Hillary, and the FBI did this and that, and we should fire them all. And the FBI, oh, it's never been so political. This is the left. And then you stop and you step back a little bit and you go, but wait a minute. Have you ever heard of Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover? Did you ever hear about what he did with the FBI? How political it was, how manipulative it was, how rights violating it was. They wouldn't let Einstein into the United States because they suspected him he was a left winger. There was an ideological screen. They didn't let Einstein in because of the ideological screen, because he was a lefty, and he was a lefty. So according to some objectivists, Einstein should not have been allowed into the United States because he was a rights violator. Hoover had files on everybody. He had a file on Ayn Rand. He had a file on everybody. He was tapping into the phones of Martin Luther King. He was tapping into the phones of everybody without warrants, often the case. The guy was a monster. Is the FBI today better or worse than it was under J. Edgar Hoover? Let's get historical perspective. Again, that perspective the time gives you, the knowing history gives you, the knowing what's possible in the future, the knowing what happens in other countries. And everybody's panicking about the latest check that Cohen got or this or that. Get a life. This will pass too, and the world's not ending. And, well, anyway, I could go on and on with that, but I'm going to leave it for
provinciality. Don't be too provincial, whether in space or time.
Let's do the one question we got for 100 rubles.
Okay.
It's $1.62.
Oh, excellent. Okay, good.
Is it rational to take amphetamine to boost one's productivity as long as one doesn't get addicted? I read both Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff did. So I'm not going to get into the particulars of the drug because I don't know anything about the particulars of drugs, and I don't know what they actually took or what they didn't take. But let me put it this way. If something can boost your productivity that is not addictive and that doesn't have negative side effects, then yeah, I have nothing against taking it. It really is a question of how confident you are on it not having the side effects and not causing long-term harm. But there's actually nothing wrong with boosting your brain power.
Let me give a little tip here. What I've heard from Rob Wolf is a nice rational paleo expert.
Okay.
And he will every year write up a little thing around the time of his birthday, and he'll say, hey, this is what I do in my life, the kind of stuff he eats and the exercise and everything else. And one thing he's talked about, and I recently had an exchange with him, and he still is doing this, he will sometimes use nicotine in the form of nicotine gum.
Yeah.
And that is helping him to be productive and focused. And my guess is it wouldn't be as dangerous as the amphetamines, but that's
well, I'm not going to recommend this, but there is a whole movement in Silicon Valley, and I've been reading up on this a little bit, not because I intend to follow the movement, because I think it's interesting, but there's a whole movement in Silicon Valley where people are taking low dose hallucinogens, things in the LSD family. And it turns out that LSD might be this amazing drug that if given appropriately, has the potential to help people with depression and help people with a lot of psychiatric problems. So, and the problem is that because it was demonized in the 60s, completely demonized, that there was a huge, massive body of research about LSD in the 50s and early 60s. And because of Timothy Leary making it into this hip, you know, it was demonized and all research stopped. And now they're starting to do research again about the effects of LSD. And it turns out to be, there's some good things about it. And when done properly and when dosed right and whatever. I don't know if any of it's true, but it's interesting. It also shows, again, what happens when government gets involved. It clamps down with science, basically. You know, knowledge disappears. But this looked like a real article about the benefits of LSD were discovered in the 50s and 60s. Then nobody used it. And now people are starting to do, so they're doing all these double-blind tests, giving LSD to certain patients under very prescribed environments where they're working with psychiatrists. And according to the paper, the results are pretty astonishing. And then there's the whole phenomena of low dosing, which supposedly increases productivity, increases focus without any downside. I'm not recommending it. I don't know if it's true, but I'm just saying if it's true. And there's nothing wrong with making yourself better if there's no long-term downside, and you have to evaluate whether there's that long-term downside or not.
Exactly. Okay. Well, that's good. Maybe one time we can have Rob Wolf on or something and grill him. He's a good guy and pretty
I'm a little
ideas
about anybody who calls himself paleo. So,
well, he's got a modified version of it that's very reasonable, probably more along the lines of the stuff that you do, Yaron. So, yeah.
I hate when I'm called paleo, even though I eat a similar diet, not quite a paleo diet, a similar diet, because I find that for many people it's become like religion, and reason seems to go out the window when they talk about paleo. So I avoid calling myself, even though I eat a similar diet.
Yeah, from what I know of Rob Wolf, that is not true of him at all. Good. So anyway.
All right. Well,
thank you very much.
45 minutes. All right.
I know. Sorry. See, I did. I made him work, people. Come on.
Yeah, you made me work. Good. Well, do you watch cartoonist Scott Adams? That's a $2.99 question. I've watched a few of his stuff. I like some of what he says. I don't like other of his said, but I'm not an expert on Scott Adams. I'm not a fan of anybody who's a big fan of Donald Trump. So I guess that would.
He's a big fan of Trump. I didn't know.
Dave Rubens used to be a fan of Donald. So I don't know. I think Trump is much worse than people think he is, including people like Scott Adams. But I don't follow Scott Adams in any kind of intense sense. No. Okay. Good show.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Amy. Well, what's happening next Saturday? I am in. Where am I? I'm in Israel. So, and then the following Saturday, I'm in London. We could probably try to do a show from London. I think Israel is going to be difficult, but I'll let you know.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. See you all. I'll see you all tomorrow. Amy will see you all whenever Amy does a show next.
But yeah, Wednesday I'll do a little check-in.
Don't forget to help Amy support her show and support her book on Patreon. Don't forget to support me on Patreon. And don't forget to subscribe and share. See you all sometime tomorrow in my case. Bye. Bye, Amy.
Excellent.